Hey top drivers, in today's video, we're diving into the Aston Martin Valkyrie AMR LMH, one of the headline cars from the latest AMS2 DLC. We'll be putting together a step-by-step setup for the legendary Le Mans circuit, and you'll be able to grab it yourself via the link in the video description if you want to give it a run. The newest beast from Aston Martin is easily one of the most controversial and most captivating machines of the modern hypercar era. Born from a close collaboration between Aston Martin and Red Bull Advanced Technologies, the Valkyrie started life as a road-going hypercar powered by a screaming, naturally aspirated V12 revving beyond 11,000 RPM. But the race-spec version, built to meet LMH regulations, went through some major transformations. The original road car featured active aero with hydraulically and electronically controlled front and rear flaps. But the hypercar rulebook bans such systems. That meant Aston Martin had to switch to fully passive aero for the LMH build. And here's where they broke from the pack. While most competitors run their single permitted adjustable aero element on the rear wing, the Valkyrie uses it on the front wing flap. This is perfectly legal under LMH rules, which allow only one adjustable aerodynamic device per car. Aston Martin clearly chose the front to stay true to the road car's aero philosophy, where ground effect and underbody airflow were the main weapons. But it's a decision with big consequences. Tuning the front instead of the rear seriously limits how much you can shift the car's aero balance between different race phases or track types, especially on high downforce circuits. For the LMH version, Aston Martin added a massive new double-element rear wing, replacing the active appendages from the road car's tail. It's designed to hit the required downforce targets within the rulebook's window, but it's completely fixed. So fine-tuning the Valkyrie's aero is all about that front flap, either in the setup screen or back in the pits. Unlike most prototypes where rear wing tweaks do the heavy lifting, the Valkyrie doesn't exactly look like it was built to be the outright queen of the class over a single lap. And the lap times from its first outings seem to back that up. The AMR LMH version officially debuted in 2025 and is something of a unicorn in the endurance world. It's the first LMH car to race in both IMSA and the WEC, thanks to the rules convergence between the ACO, FIA, and IMSA. That puts it in a unique position, not just from a sporting standpoint, but also because of the technical choices that set it apart. That said, it's still a young project, very much in development. Watching it trackside, you can tell it's still got some rough edges to smooth out, but the potential is written all over it. The Aston Martin Valkyrie LMH is a rolling R&D lab. It's different, it's extreme, and it's born from an unconventional vision. But it's also a project that will need time and mileage to carve out its place among the hypercars. The decision to run an adjustable front flap instead of a movable rear wing sums up this whole philosophy. An original approach, but one that for now seems to limit its outright lap pace. The results from Le Mans 2025 show that the car already has a strong base for reliability and consistency, but it still needs to build that top-end speed. The Valkyrie program is run by the factory-backed The Heart of Racing team, which fields one car in IMSA, number 23, driven by Ross Gunn and Roman DeAngelis, and two cars in the FIA WEC, including the 24 Hours of Le Mans. The number 007, naturally a nod to the most famous 00 agent of them all, James Bond, and the number 009. At the 2025 Le Mans debut, both Valkyries reached the checkered flag. The number 009, DeAngelis Ribera Sorensen, finished 12th overall on 383 laps, while the 007, Gamble Gunn Tinknell, came home 14th on 381 laps. In qualifying, the number 009 set a 3 minutes 24.869, snagging the last available spot for Hyperpole in 15th place, while the number 007 clocked a 326.349 for 20th. A clean, error-free debut for both cars, but the raw pace is still some way off the sharp end of the class. And while we're on the Le Mans topic, there's a quick note for AMS2 players. In the sim, when you switch an LMDH car from high downforce to low downforce LD trim, the drop in aero load comes purely from changing the wing settings. For example, an HD setup might run the rear wing at level 6, while the LD version of the same car might drop it to level 3. In other words, the whole balance between downforce and drag is managed simply by tweaking the flaps. With the Valkyrie, though, things play out differently. Its downforce and drag levels are already different by default, even with identical setup values. The HD version of the Valkyrie naturally produces more downforce and more drag than the LD version, even at the lowest settings. And since the Valkyrie is the only GTP in the field that can adjust only its front wing and not the rear, its range of adjustments is inherently unbalanced. We don't have the full list of structural differences between the two specs, but observations show that in LD trim, the downforce increase per step, say from 0 to 2, follows a similar curve to the HD version. It just starts from a lower baseline in both downforce and drag. Many cars, formula cars included, also have visible changes between HD and LD versions, like different wing profiles. That's part of why multiple variants exist in AMS2, not just for functional reasons, but also to keep the visual details authentic. Before we dive into setup building, here's a little treat. As usual, the AMS2 devs don't miss a beat, and if you zoom in on the rear wings of the Valkyrie's rivals, you can spot the adjustable rear wing detail work on the BMW, Alpine, Cadillac, Lamborghini, and Porsche. When you're running the Valkyrie LMH in low downforce trim, you need a laser-precise setup to keep it fast and stable through the trickiest parts of the track, especially the Porsche curves. Our initial roadmap, planned blind before even turning a lap, focuses on several key points. Naturally, we'll start with the aero, no surprise there, aiming to run the car as low as possible at the front and doing the same at the rear to maintain a neutral platform. It's crucial to check telemetry at top speed sections to make sure we're not running too much rake, one axle higher than the other, as that can increase drag and cost precious straight line speed. And the straights are often where you can pull off the safest overtakes. Too much rear squat under acceleration can have the same negative effect. Once we've nailed the ideal ride heights, the next step is to stiffen the chassis mechanically to support the aero balance we're aiming for. Since our goal here is stability, we'll stiffen the front more than the rear. Shock tuning will be another critical piece. Running stiffer high-speed damping at the front and slightly softer at the rear can help dial out traction imbalances. The idea here is to let the car follow the track surface better. A softer rear allows better traction, keeping the driven wheels planted over bumps and curbs during acceleration. That keeps the back end hooked up, making it easier for the driver to put the power down cleanly, with less wheel spin and more control. On the flip side, a stiffer front end will make the car a bit more twitchy. It can bounce on curb entry, causing small grip losses and temporary understeer, especially if, like the Valkyrie, your aero balance is heavily front biased thanks to its unique adjustable front flap setup. From a dynamic balance standpoint, this setup choice gives the car a more predictable feel. The rear end stays planted and reassuring on corner exit, while the front feels sharper, but also more prone to sending harsh vibrations and jolts through the chassis. If the car starts to lose stability in steady-state conditions, it might be necessary to either raise the front slightly or stiffen it further to prevent instability caused by track undulations. At Le Mans, we've seen how even a small dip in the asphalt can throw off the car's balance, making it skittish through high-speed sections. Before we carry on with the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell so you don't miss any of our future content. And if you want to share your passion for sim racing, join our Facebook group, Università del Sim Racing. Another interesting factor is the final drive ratio. In LD trim, the Valkyrie can benefit from a longer gear ratio to really exploit the reduced aero drag and higher top speeds on long straights. In fact, the AMS2 devs addressed this with patch 1.6.6.3 while we were still working on this video. For the first run, we'll start with the default setup, which already has the front wing set to minimum, and make just a couple of quick tweaks, bumping brake pressure to 100% and increasing steering lock, while focusing mainly on ride height and thus rake, aero balance, and gear ratios. Looking at the data, we notice that despite the stock ride heights being quite high, especially at the rear, there's still plenty of room to work, but the rake is already close to zero with a slight negative value. That's a red flag. At least in low downforce trim, the Valkyrie could be a real handful to tame, given it doesn't have an adjustable rear wing to help dial things in. The center of pressure, measured as always at the end of the longest straight, when aero effect is at its peak, stable, and isolated from other forces, shows around 59%. When you compare that with the 54.8% rearward weight distribution, it explains the excessive looseness and oversteer we've been feeling at the wheel, especially in fast sweepers. The ride height graphs immediately make us suspect a rather unusual approach from the developers. Under braking, the rear consistently drops out of any usable operating window, completely losing downforce and making the car extremely unstable. That's something we'll have to factor in, both when making setup changes and when driving. Next, we move on to gearing by first calculating the optimal power band for the Aston Martin V12. Between 6,400 and 8,250 RPM, the engine delivers over 90% of its maximum output, giving peak efficiency under acceleration. With a measured max power of almost 700 horsepower, the power curve climbs steadily to a flat peak before leveling off. From the graph, you can see it starts to plateau from around 7,800 RPM upwards, a sign the engine is approaching either its mechanical or electronic ceiling. Below 6,400 RPM, there's still a solid rise, but it's not as steep as before. Peak power comes right at 8,250 RPM. This means that both in gear ratio selection and shift strategy, it's crucial to keep the engine in this hot zone to get the best performance. Second and third gear, light blue and green, start below 6,000 RPM and run to about 8,400 RPM, but only near the top do they settle into the high power zone. Fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh overlap almost perfectly within the 6,400 to 8,400 RPM range, exactly where the densest cluster of data points sits, showing that in real track use, the engine spends a lot of time there. The top of the higher gears, especially 7th, red, shows point clusters between 8,200 and 8,400 RPM, right inside the peak power band. This tells us the gearing is set to maximize time in the sweet spot, but also that the limiter is hit frequently. With top speed capped at roughly 329 kilometers per hour, this becomes a clear bottleneck at Le Mans. On the Hunaudière straights and the section between Mulsanne and Indianapolis, the limiter arrives too early, leaving a dead zone where the engine's spinning past the point with no gain in speed or usable power. That short 7th gear makes the car punchy through medium speed sections, but it works against you on very long straights where the engine ends up sitting on the limiter for too long. While there's a slight overshoot past the upper limit of the power band, it's not a critical issue. The power drop-off is minimal and often negligible, especially if it helps complete a full acceleration run. On tracks with long straights like Le Mans, it can even be advantageous. It only becomes a problem if you're running well beyond the power band for extended periods or across multiple gears, as the engine would then be pushing less and overall efficiency would suffer. In short, the key principle here is to maximize the amount of time spent inside the power band to fully exploit the engine's potential. With that in mind, and based on both our first analysis and the on-track feel, we made our first setup changes. Surprisingly, aiming for a rake of 0 actually made the car more oversteery in critical braking phases, so we decided to go in the opposite direction. We dropped the rear ride height by 6 millimeters and raised the front by 2 millimeters, while also increasing the bump stops on the third spring, front and rear, to control nosedive without having to stiffen the main suspension springs. The third spring engages when both wheels on the same axle compress or extend together, such as underbraking, hard acceleration, or when the car is being pushed into the ground by downforce at the end of a long straight. This way, we could keep the general balance intact for now. For gearing, we systematically lengthened the ratios to make full use of the power band without hitting the limiter too early. The results were promising. The Valkyrie felt less twitchy, more composed. No surprise, given that the cop had shifted rearward to almost 65%. The revised gearbox setup delivered an excellent new top speed of 342 kilometers per hour, up from 329 kilometers per hour. From 3rd through 7th gear, the engine stayed consistently in the ideal 6,600 to 8,400 RPM range, ensuring strong traction and steady acceleration. 7th now reaches 342 kilometers per hour just under the limiter, squeezing every bit of available push without capping out, so there's no need to lengthen it further. From 2nd gear upwards, every shift now falls perfectly within the 6,600 to 8,400 RPM sweet spot, with upshifts coming just past 8,000 to catch the power peak. The delivery is smooth and continuous. No dips below the band, no RPM holes between shifts. 7th is spot on. It avoids the limiter, yet still delivers maximum drive up to 340 plus kilometers per hour without plateauing. This is a well-optimized Le Mans configuration with final drive and gear spread matched to both the engine curve and the circuit's aero demands. Next, we moved on to camber temps to see if there was room for improvement. We focused on the last part of Sector 3 from the Porsche curves onward, where fast sweepers load the tires heavily laterally. The inner, middle, outer temperature readings across the tire width already looked good. Assigned the contact patch was strong, but since we still had a few degrees of delta available between inside and outside, we decided to add a touch more negative camber on both axles to increase the tire's footprint through the corners. In that same section, the Valkyrie now suffers from pronounced mid-corner understeer, a direct consequence of the ride height changes, which shifted the aero balance rearwards. However, since we still noticed some instability during the initial turn-in of high-speed corners, we stiffened the front suspension spring and softened the rear, aiming to stabilize the car. For the mid-corner understeer, we go in the complete opposite direction with the anti-roll bars, stiffening the rear bar and softening the front. The lap time hasn't dropped, but the car is less prone to sudden snaps and feels more stable through the fast sweepers. That said, it's still a tricky machine to push to the limit due to its unstable aero behavior in transitional phases. On top of that, over the curbs in Sector 3, it unsettles very easily, and in the middle sector, it tends to spin if the curbs are attacked aggressively. That last detail tells us that, in terms of ride height, we're already near the limits of adjustment. So we move on to tweaking the high-speed damper settings. The histograms already show a healthy distribution of compression and rebound velocities, but given the Valkyrie's extreme aero sensitivity, we're happy to treat the dampers as tools for aero management, ignoring the telemetry comfort zone and focusing purely on controlling the platform's behavior. Our first step, purely mechanical, as we outlined in our initial roadmap, is to stiffen the front high-speed damping and slightly soften the rear. This helps address traction imbalances. A very stiff front in high-speed compression can cause momentary front grip loss over curbs, as the wheels can't fully follow the irregular surface. This shows up more as temporary understeer, a lack of directional bite, than as true traction loss, and it's a trade-off we accept for the added stability. We also adjust the low-speed damping since it can bring gains under big load changes caused by aggressive on-off throttle use. We stiffen both compression and rebound at the front and rear, aiming to calm down the aero platform during transitions and boost overall stability. Since the rear still seems to completely lose downforce under heavy braking, dropping out of the usable ride height window, we stiffen the front third spring and its associated low-speed compression damper and increase the low-speed rebound damping at the rear. The aim is to keep the rear end lower during pitch, so it stays at least within a minimal workable ride height range. Finally, we move on to fine-tuning. Brake ducts and radiator openings are closed up to gain efficiency, engine braking is increased, and both the coast ramp and preload on the differential are raised to improve stability under braking. We also add more positive toe at the rear while reducing the negative toe at the front. After these major changes, the Valkyrie feels transformed, quick, stable enough in transitional phases, and precise on turn-in. However, telemetry still shows the odd ride height behavior under braking and the persistent high-speed understeer during direction changes in Sector 3. As a final tweak, we lower the front ride height by 1 millimeter and shorten the bump stop gap. And since we're working on a qualifying setup, we do a quick pressure check and adjust the cold starting pressures to ensure the tires are right in their working window by the time we reach the last sector. On the push lap, the Aston Martin was blisteringly quick in the middle sector, nearly 3/10 faster than the world record. But in Sector 1, and especially Sector 3, it lost out to rivals with adjustable rear wings, which simply fly through the final high-speed sweepers. The Valkyrie remained stable there, but was right at the edge of available grip. Push any harder, and it would instantly swap from understeer to snap oversteer. The final time was 2.3 seconds off the world record, but still good enough for 26th fastest globally and fastest Valkyrie time overall. There's still clear room for improvement, both in fine-tuning the setup and in taking advantage of the generous track limits at the legendary French circuit. Now, tire pressures in the most critical spot, the fast sweepers of Sector 3, are right where we want them, but there's still potential to go lower on rear ride height to gain stability under braking and corner entry. From our tests, as we approach the absolute minimum values, ride height behavior becomes more controlled. But on the straights, the floor starts acting like a cheese grater. That would require heavy use of bump stops, which would make the rear axle dangerously stiff, plus front ride height work, to avoid losing too much top speed with an extreme negative rake, and, most importantly, mechanical setup tweaks to dial out as much of that annoying high-speed understeer as possible. And of course, you'd need to be extra careful over the curbs. The immense power from the Aston Martin's VI-12 makes it a weapon on the endless straights. But just like its real-world counterpart, the Valkyrie isn't exactly easy to wring out over a single flying lap, especially on a track as long as Le Mans in low downforce trim. And without an adjustable rear wing, it always feels like you're working with a short blanket, cover one side and the others expose. All in all, while the ride height and overall aero behaviors still leave us scratching our heads, the Valkyrie, like the other Aston Martins in the DLC, is an absolutely worthy addition to the AMS2 roster. A prototype that's both hugely fun and deeply challenging to drive. And that's a wrap for this video. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next content, and join the Universitatel Sim Racing community to share your passion for virtual motorsport.